Adam, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Chris. Great to be on.
So before we start, I wonder if you could just touch base to our listeners. Who are you? What's your background with golf? And perhaps how did your book, the Golfer's Manual, actually come into existence?
Yeah, so I'm a UK golf coach, but I am actually based in Las Vegas now. I've just moved here, so I've been in the States for a few years and moved around as most golf coaches do. We kind of go different places around the world. So been in Europe, and anyway, that's a bit too boring for the viewers. But yeah, my reputation, I suppose, has come from the book, The Practice Manual, which has been a bestseller on Amazon now since it's been launched. Really, it stayed kind of in the top 20, which really surprises me. Because as I always say, I didn't write it with the intention of selling a lot of copies. I wrote it with the intention of it being a book that I would want to read as a real golf geek. I wanted it to be something new, something completely different. I wanted everybody who read it, regardless of their level, whether a complete beginner or a golf coach, to have some value from it, if not a crazy amount of value. But yeah, it just did a hell of a lot better than I thought it would, and that allowed me to move over to America and live the life that I do at the moment. And so yeah, that's the kind of story.
Let's cut straight into it, because I know there's so much you cover in that book, and perhaps I think a lot of the listeners sort of pick up on is how should someone spend their time on the range, and what are some specific things to work on? Where should the focus be? And perhaps you just give us some examples to get straight into it.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, people who practice, they're generally well-intentioned. They're trying to improve their games, unless they're just there for a little bit of entertainment. But so, those type of people, they are researching and reading what to practice. And unfortunately, most of the instruction, I think, you don't have to pick up a Golf Digest book, or I shouldn't maybe mention magazines specifically, but any kind of book. And it is 99.99% swing instruction or movement based. And what I decided to do with the book was say, what are the most important parts of the golf swing, or what are the common denominators between all these movements? What's the ultimate goal here? And the ultimate goal in golf is to get that club on the ball effectively, or get that club head moving through impact correctly, or in a functional way. So the impact interval only lasts 0.75 of an inch. So it's a really small space in time. And I think people actually forget that is the most important part. That determines everything about the result. So if your ball misses to the right, or misses short, or flies 300 yards, that is completely 100% result of what happened in that 0.75 inches of space. So all of my practice and the entire book, it was designed to say, how can we improve that 0.75 of an inch of space? And so, yes, there are elements of swing work that would need to be done in order to do that. But there's also a lot of skill training. And that is not talked about in golf, which is crazy, because all other sports are predominantly skill-based sports or skill-based training. So if you wanted to, I always ask people, if you wanted to throw a ball into a bucket and you wanted to get better at that basic skill, what type of things could you do in your training to improve it? And everybody mentions things like, oh, well, you could make the bucket smaller to make it more difficult. That would improve your skill. You could move the bucket around even. So you're now adding difficulty. You could do it from different places. You could stand closer to the bucket, farther away. So all these answers that people come up with are all skill-based interventions. It's funny that hardly anybody mentions, oh, you could analyze your arm movement or change the angle of your wrist. And yet that's how we approach golf. So there's this kind of disparity between how we approach learning other skills and how we approach learning golf. I think that stems from the difficulty of golf. Golf is one of these insanely, even the elite level. I mean, I tweeted something the other day that Tiger Woods dominated at one point, hitting about 50% of fairways. So, I mean, this is just the most insanely difficult sport. And I think when something is difficult, people automatically veer towards more complex answers, whereas simple answers can actually be better for more complex sports. I don't know if I've gone off on a complete tangent there. I can't even remember the original question.
You keep, this is great.
I think the original question is how can we, or what should we focus on in practice? And I actually separated the book into 5 different phases. And you don't have to do all at once, obviously, but I actually show you which points in the season you should use each phase. So yes, there is a technical phase there. So that is where you may focus on your swing mechanics. But I always highlight the main goals of that are to produce a movement that is not going to cause you injury. So say someone's making a move and I'm looking at it and I think, oh, I've seen that move before and I've seen the same injuries happen. Then that would be a great time to change your movement because we don't want to get injured. But the other goals are to either increase consistency of impact or just to improve impact completely from a more direct point of view. So that's the goal of the movement training. The second phase is my favorite, and this is, I called it experimental training. And this is basically where you mess around with different variables. It's the adult form of play. And so there are a couple of ways that you could do this. One of the wilder forms of this is called differential practice. So as a simple thing that lots of people can connect with, I might ask beginners to stand there and I might ask them to hit it as far left as they can. Now, I'd give them some information. I'd say that the club face direction is the biggest determinant of overall direction. And I'd say just hit 10, 20, 30 shots for me, trying to get the club face as closed as possible impact. And then we'd reverse it for the next 20, 30 shots. And so that's called differential practice. It's doing something you wouldn't necessarily want, because you don't want to hit it as far left or right as possible on the golf course. But in doing that in training, we actually learn new things. We learn new skills. So the body learns feel. You could lump it under proprioception, exteroception, lots of things like that. But feel, hand-eye coordination. It also learns, or you learn as a person, how to edit your own swing. So, and I've tested this with amateurs. If I get one group of golfers and I tell them, hit the ball just as straight as you can, over and over and over. And then I get another group of golfers and ask them to hit it left and right. 1 week later, when tested, the golfers who were asked to hit left and right actually can hit the ball straighter. And that's really counterintuitive. And the reason for that, I believe, is that the ones who were hitting different directions, they've actually learned skills to be able to change and manipulate at will the club face at impact. There's the technical work, there's the experimental or play work. So another version of play would be trying to hit different parts of the face, either toe or heel, trying to swing different path directions. And these are all things that we're taught against, because there's that old mantra of perfect practice makes perfect. And it's not true. It really isn't true, because I've done so many different tests and studies and found that when you actually throw more variability in, people learn quicker. There's a time and a place to do that. You're not going to get someone to learn a completely different skill right before they go out for a round of golf. But if it's like a week before a tournament, that might be fine. What were the other phases? We've got the third phase was calibration. That's just basically you're trying to hone in on what you do want now. So you've done the experimental, you've explored the boundaries. Now you're trying to close in with calibration practice on what you do want. That's typically what most golfers will do in their practice, but they don't include things like a direct impact focus. They're still focused on their swing. I'll quickly go through the last 2 phases. The other phase was performance training. So this is the type of work that we would do more before an event. And this is just testing a few variables to see which one the player performs better with. So as a quick example, I might ask a player to focus on something in their swing that they're working on, and we hit 20 or 30 shots. And then I might ask them to focus on trying to hit a certain shape. So it's a different focus. They're trying to maybe fade it or draw it or just focusing on the target. And out of those two tests, we see which one performed better. So I had an example of a guy a few weeks ago who was focusing on shoulder turn. And when he did that, he hit just 50% of the fairways. We measured it with TrackMan, and we set out a theoretical 30-yard fairway. So focusing on shoulder turn, he only hit 50% fairways. I then asked him to focus on the target. So pick a small like leaf or blade of grass in the target and just keep that in his head. And his fairways hit went up to 70%. So just that little shift in focus improved his fairways hit by 20%. So that's an example of something you're doing before tournaments. So you can say to him, okay, well, we know what you need to be thinking of on tournament time. And then the last phase, the fifth phase, is transference practice. So this is just game-like training. So it's where we might play, I might set someone out a target and I say, right, hit one driver down there. If successful, go and get your 7-iron, hit a 7-iron down that target. If successful, go get your wedge, hit a wedge down that target. And if you get that final one successfully, then you have 1 point. So it's a point-based thing. It's designed to simulate the game more, the game of golf more. It's designed to add pressure, add elements like your routine and things like that. And there's a million different types of transference practice games that you can do, but it's basically game simulation.
That's fascinating. And how would you going back to sort of the first step of those five? How about you to go about sort of identifying what needs to be worked on in each one of those steps?
Perfect. Yeah. So I always, the first point of analysis is a performance thing. So I say to someone, right, which thing is going to give you the most improvement in your scores? And there are only 3 things that a golfer needs to improve. They either need to hit the ball farther, or they need to improve their distance control, or they need to improve their direction control. It's always one of those 3 things. And so just by looking at someone's stats, we can say, well, you're missing more shots long or short. So, and that's a common one for higher handicap golfers. They will miss more shots long and short of their intended target. So due to fat shots, thin shots, things like that. At the better levels, players will tend to have good distance control, but they'll miss more left to right shots. So it's just identifying, and obviously you can improve all of them, but really you're looking at your stats and saying, well, you're losing more shots by missing long or short, so let's focus on that. Let's have all our practice focused around that. So the next stage would be to say, well, what relates to that performance factor? Now, if someone's missing long or short, they have to improve either ground contact or face contact in general. It could also be a case of the player is really poor at selecting clubs, or they're misjudging the wind strength a lot, things like that. But in general, the technical things that relate to distance control is ground contact and face contact. And so from there, now we have an idea of what we need to improve, and then we can look at technical interventions or skill interventions or even concepts that can improve ground contact or face contact.
You go through these and pick them up, and then you would do drills to sort of enhance each one.
Exactly, yeah. So, if we've identified this player is missing long or short, we've then broken it down and we've identified that, okay, this player is suffering with ground contact more often, then we would add drills. So you could add a technical thing. So say this player is hitting it fat a lot. You could say, right, well, what technically would relate to that? Well, maybe a little bit more weight shift would help. That would be a technical intervention. A skill intervention might be getting into a bunker, drawing a line in the bunker and asking a player to make swings trying to hit that line first. Or a great drill that I do, I wouldn't recommend this to golfers for a few reasons. I don't want anybody coming back and trying to sue me for this. So I'm not saying go out and do this, but I get an old club, we get on a slab of concrete, and I draw a little X on the concrete. And I say, make swings and hit that X for me. And the initial one shocks everybody because they make a swing, they try and hit the X, and inevitably they hit 4 or 5 inches behind it. And they go, whoa, what happened there? But then within 3, 4, 5 swings, they start hitting closer to that X. And you can see the little chip on the concrete. And you must use an old club for this if you are going to do it, because you don't want to scratch the bottom of your PXGs or whatever you have. But it's a simple form of feedback. I'm not telling them technically what to do or what to change, but they're getting better at the skill. And so that goes into a concept called self-organization. Now, as I'm standing there watching them as a teacher, I'm seeing technical changes. I'm seeing this person shift their weight a little bit more, but they're not thinking of it. And that's a big difference. So this idea of giving someone a skill drill and watching the technique improve as a result of it is completely different to how the rest of the industry goes about improvement. So the rest of the industry goes about improvement by trying to change technique first in order to change the skill. And it doesn't work as well in reverse.
Interesting. There's a small story I wanted to bring up about I was playing in the Fowler series at Royal Porth Call, and Oliver Fisher's coach was there at the time, and he came and gave a talk about Ollie's approach to practice and how he was never afraid to rebuild his swing and trying to implement new changes, and he was never afraid of sort of knowing that he would accept to get a lot worse to get better. I was wondering what your thoughts on that are, and is that the right approach?
It's a tough one. I think that's a good viewpoint to have. Or if you start off with the viewpoint that any technical change might make you worse, it basically just prepares you for the worst case scenario. It's not, I've made changes with people where they do instantly get better. But I say changing your technique is like jumping into a new car. That's the analogy I give people to kind of prepare them for it. Now, you might jump into a Formula One car. It is a better car, but you still have to get used to it. You're probably going to stall it for the first few shots because you're still not used to it yet. So there's still that time that's needed to re-ingrain the movements. So yes, even a better swing move might not make you better straight away. There's still going to be that period of learning where you have to get used to it. So I think if that's the expectation, then you guard yourself against the worst case scenario, because there's nothing worse than someone jumping into a new swing, having 2 or 3 shots at it and go, this doesn't work. Because like I said, that's less like jumping into the Formula One car, stalling it, and then jumping out going, this is a bad car. It's like, well, no, I just haven't got used to it yet. And I think that's where many amateurs struggle to improve, is because they're not willing to go through that initial learning to get the benefit after it of a beautiful Formula One car swing. I think it can work in reverse, however, especially for elite golfers. So now when you get to the professional level, those guys have already been through what I just described. They've changed their swing so many times to get to the elite level that they're kind of addicted to that. They're in the mindset of, oh, if I change my swing, I'm going to go through this bad period, but there's a light at the end of the tunnel that is brighter. And that can be dangerous, because what if there's not? And I don't know the full story with Tiger, but there are plenty of stories similar to that where Tiger Woods was, dominating, hitting 70% fairways, 300 yards, just killing it. And he thought there was a brighter light. So he went seeking new pastures. And unfortunately, it didn't turn out as well for him, in my opinion. I think and lots of people agree that he probably should have stuck with with what he dominated with. So yeah, there's a double or two sides to that story. And so, yeah, I think understanding that, yes, improvement can take time, and you might go through a small bad patch initially is good, but you've got to watch that you don't go too much down that rabbit hole and constantly stay in the learning phase.
How can one identify what to work on within their game? Are they to be collecting data and that to highlight certain factors within their game, and that's what they've got to spend their time and focus working on? Or can you just touch on what's the best way for someone to really sort of home in and figure out what they need to do?
Yeah, well, I mean, most amateurs, they just randomly throwing darts. They're just throwing darts in the dark. Basically, they pick up a magazine, they look at something, they go, "Oh, if I swing it like Dustin Johnson, maybe that'll improve me." And we know how that works out. It doesn't improve you. In fact, it's more likely to make you worse. So my approach has always been based, again, on those three things. Does the player need more distance, better distance control, or better accuracy, which is side-to-side dispersion? From there, we can link to the impact factors that relate. So again, whatever the performance parameter is, I know what a player needs to improve, and I highlight these in my programs. I mean, this could make an entire podcast in itself. But to summarize, if a player needs distance control, we're generally looking at ground contact or face contact. Those are the things we're going to improve. If a player needs direction control, so they're missing a lot left and right, then they need to improve their face angle or their swing path at impact. With a driver, face strike might also come in because there's something called gear effect. And then if a player needs more distance, then they either need to improve club head speed or angle of attack or face strike. So from that basic algorithm, I'm saying, right, this player needs more distance, therefore, which one of those impact parameters need to change? And then we can build an entire plan based on that. So that is a very outcome-focused improvement plan, because it's saying what is the outcome you need, and then it goes directly to the source of what improves it. So that way you're kind of guaranteed improvement, because you're not just randomly picking swing pieces that might not even relate. I see so many amateurs who I say, "What do you need more of?" And they're like, "Well, I need to fix my slice." I say, "So what are you working on?" And they're like, "Well, I'm working on my shoulder turn, or I'm working on not moving my head." And you just think, well, that doesn't relate. It doesn't improve the impact factors that you need to improve. So, yeah, it's just getting golfers clearer on what they need to improve in itself can be just a great long-term solution.
What kind of self-analysis can the golfer do to correct themselves?
Keeping stats. So I always ask golfers to just keep basic stats of, did you miss left or right, long or short of your intention, of your aim. So that might not be the flag. So for example, if I'm aiming at the middle of the green and I miss it left and the flag happens to be there, well, on traditional stats, that would go down as a very good shot. But in my stats, that would go down as, no, I missed it to the left. So yeah, keeping track of where your ball finishes relative to your aim is important. And then from there, we can go down that analysis of what needs to change at impact. Also, something I think you're leading towards this is analysis of the ball flight itself. The ball flight tells you everything you need to know about impact, or pretty much everything you need to know. So if that ball is starting left and curving right, we know that the path is left and the face is open to it. And if a player happens to hit a 7-9, it goes 150, the next one goes 150, the next one goes 150, and then all of a sudden they hit 100 yards, it's probably going to be a ground strike or a face strike issue that we're looking at. So the ball flight tells us everything we need to know about what happened at impact.
You refer to golfers in your book as almost like the stock market, and they jump around from sort of shooting a really low score to almost the next day jumping from like a 62 to a 75. A lot of it comes down to sort of consistency, as you mentioned. How can we get better at consistency and doing the small things well?
Yeah, I mean, the stock market is the perfect example for that. The first thing to understand is there is no consistency in golf. Even the elite levels, they can shoot 62 one day and then follow it with a 75, which is 13 shot swing. Most amateurs freak out when they do that. They play their best round ever and shoot 40 points, and then next day they go out and shoot 27, and they think they've completely lost it. And it's like, no, there's no consistency. A 13 shot swing is normal, or it can happen, and it should happen, and it does happen. What you need to do is not try and be more consistent. You need to be better. The best players aren't consistently shooting 62, is that's their best round, but their average is maybe a 69, 68, something like that. So you need to move the average down, and that's what you need to look at. Golfers, I think amateur golfers always base their golf based on their best rounds, or their expectations are based off their best rounds. Now, if a pro did that, they drive themselves nuts. Oh, I'm expected to shoot 62 every time I go out. That's not going to happen. You just can't do that. And it's like the stock market. I mean, you see the Dow at the moment is going up and down, up and down. And if you look at it from a daily level, the news reports are wild. They're like, oh, the Dow plummets. Yesterday it plummeted. Dow plummets. That's it. We're in a recession. And then next week it rallies and goes back up 2%. And they're like, oh, the Fed dropped interest rates. And it's the news reports remind me of a golfer's mindset. It's just really wild. Not realistic, and they need to take a step out, look at the bigger picture. So the bigger picture would be saying, right, what's happened to the Dow over the last 3 years? What's happened to the Dow over the last 10, 20, 30, 100 years? And it's an upward trend. It kind of smooths the graph out a lot. And I think golfers need to do that as well. They need to stop looking at shot to shot. They need to stop looking at round to round. What they need to look at is more month to month, or even 3 month periods. And that will smooth out a lot of the curves, and it keeps a player on track, because the problem is if an amateur has one bad round, they jump off their plan and they chase a new shiny object. And that's like seeing the Dow drop 2% and then pulling all your money out and going to buy a different stock. It's been proven that all the investors who do that, they end up with less money over the longer period. So it's better to stick with one stock. And for me, that is improving impact variables.
Yeah, I guess it's chasing sort of instant gratification rather than playing the long-term game.
Exactly, yeah. Being impatient with it, and just, the moment something doesn't work, jumping off and trying something new in the hope that this is the secret. And I think that's the big issue, is lots of amateurs think there is a secret to the game. If there is one, it's impact, because that guarantees improvement. But even knowing it, it still has to be developed, and that development can take a long time.
I remember I think I read somewhere about Eddie Pepperell and his sort of mindset for the last couple of years, as I was sat opposite him at breakfast at Q School in Spain about 3 years ago, and he was fighting for his tour card. And obviously since then he's done phenomenally well, and it was a little indicator about his mindset of the last 2 years and how he really didn't try to change much at all. He knew his tendencies, he knew what he's good at and what he's bad at, and he said actually it was about just doing the simple things incredibly well and not changing much.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, you look at some of the top players like Jack Nicklaus or Arnold Palmer, and some of them had really funky swings. I mean, Jack Nicklaus had a flying right elbow, early extended, and yet they kind of just stuck with what they do, and it's tough, because yes, there are times to change. My biggest thing is always, well, let's change something that's going to change function. Lots of amateurs, like I said, they'll change their swing to achieve a look. They're like, well, I just want my swing to look different. And well, that doesn't relate to the function as much as you think it does. Let's work on this impact stuff, and you're guaranteed improvement. And so, yeah, I'm always trying to just veer people towards that, because I prove it to them every day. A player comes on my lesson tee with a certain swing. They leave hitting the ball 20 yards farther and straighter, and their swing looks almost identical on video camera.
How do you set up goals within your game? What is the best way about sort of setting them and reaching them?
Yeah, I do a lot of blogging, and or even when I wrote the book, the goal was, let's write a golf book. So that's the big goal. Then I broke that down into, well, what topics do I want to cover? So those were the chapters. So I wrote down about 10 chapters or whatever it was. Then in each one of those chapters, I break it down into what subheadings do I want to write about? And then I broke that down into what bullet points can I have? And then I started writing the book. And that's how I approach everything. It's have this big goal, break it down into sub goals, break each of those down into sub goals, and then break each of those down into sub goals. I mean, you can keep going endlessly, but I think if you just have a big goal of, I want to be a 7 handicap. Well, that's great, but let's have a look at how you're going to achieve that. And then we could say, right, if you want to be a 7 handicap, you've got to improve your distance control. So that's the sub goal. That's the chapter. How are we going to improve distance control? Well, you need to improve ground strike and face strike. So that's the subheading. How are we going to improve ground strike and face strike? Well, you need to do this technically, and you need to do this skill drill. So that's the kind of goal setting there. Again, it's like the ultimate goal that's not really in our control is that I want X result. But you're more in control of the process itself of, well, I can go and try this technique, or I can go and implement this technique, and I can go and try this skill drill X amount of times per week. So yeah, that's how I go about goal setting.
So really deconstructing the bigger picture to something.
Exactly. Yeah.
Let's do some sort of quick rapid fire questions. What is the book or books you've given the most, and why? Or what are the 1 to 3 books that have greatly influenced your life? It can be outside of golf as well.
Yeah, no, I do a lot of reading outside of golf. I don't read much inside of golf anymore. There are a few better books coming out in golf that I will go into, but yeah, I read a lot on psychology or economics, things like that. Probably one of the best books I've read is by a guy called Ben Goldacre. I believe he's British, and he wrote a book called Bad Science. And it really it helps you think more critically about everything. So he talked about things like the placebo effect and analyzing the results of science and what it truly means. And I suppose the biggest thing it highlighted to me was the difference between correlation and causation. And I think that's huge for golf because, like I said, so many golfers are playing random golf. They're picking things that might correlate with success, but don't cause it. So a basic example is someone could look at golfers, an alien could come down and look at golfers and go, oh, if I have a sponsor on my hat, I'll play better golf. You go, well, why is that? And they say, well, look, all these top golfers have sponsors on their hats, therefore it must make you better. And we know that's ridiculous, but many amateurs don't see that. They're like, oh, well, if I just get my left arm in this position, I'll play better golf. And that might correlate a little bit more, but it doesn't relate, because I know from teaching experience, if I just change someone's left arm position, their shot results are not going to get better in most cases. In some cases it will. I suppose I have the advantage as an instructor to say, right, based on thousands of golfers, teaching golfers, I can say if I make X change, it will have Y result to a certain percentage. So as an example, if I've got a golfer slicing it, or say I take 100 golfers who are slicing it to the right, if I change their grip, it might change the result by 80%. If I change the swing path, it might only change the result by 30%. And there's a load of different variables I could change, and then from there I will pick the one that correlates more highly, and I know actually causes the change as well. So yeah, it's about understanding that, and I try in all my educational programs to help golfers find the highest causal factors. So they're like, right, the problem is I need to fix my slice. Therefore, the options I have are here. And out of those options, this one is going to work the best based on Adam's instructing experience.
Very interesting. I'll have to look that one up, and I'll put it in the show notes as well. Do you have any more, just while we're on that note?
Yeah, I suppose on the psychology part, there's one, I think, there's a series of books called A Very Brief Introduction to, at least I think that's what they are. And they're great starting points for anything you're interested in. They're really short reads, usually about 50 pages or so. And there's one, A Very Short Introduction to Consciousness. And it takes you through really briefly a load of different studies in consciousness. And it just makes you question everything about who you are. Because it's like, things on free will and things like that. And again, I'm reading this and thinking, oh, wow, that actually relates to golf a lot. So the idea of the unconscious mind and the conscious mind, and kind of separating those out.
What purchase of $100 or less has most positively impacted your life? Again, this can be on or off the golf course.
Oh man, this is tough one. I suppose thinking of a coaching thing, it would have to be foot spray. So it's influenced my life because it influences everybody else's. So it's Dr. Scholl's foot spray, or in the UK, I think you can get Dactarin foot spray, which is, I think you can get it from Asda. Or if you're in the States and you want a cheaper version, the CVS brand of foot spray is good. And you spray the club face, and it leaves a white dusting or white coat on the club face. And so when you hit a shot, you can actually look at the club face and see where you've hit the ball, or whether you've hit the sweet spot or more towards the toe or heel. And so that feedback alone, I've had people who they come to me for lessons and they're like, I just don't know what's wrong. It just doesn't feel right. I'm not getting a lot of distance at the moment. And so we spray the face and we find out every single shot is from the toe. And they go, I didn't realize that. And so just feedback alone can sometimes help people improve it. And I've had it so many times where people see it's on the toe, and then within a few swings, they can fix themselves without me having to tell them anything. So it's a great thing. You can also spray a line on the ground, place the ball on the line, and then you can check where your divots are relative to that line. So it's a great form of feedback for all of that.
And what are the benefits of hitting it on the toe to, say, on the heel?
Well, I suppose the closer you get to the heel, the closer it gets to a shank. But you've got a little bit more margin for error on the toe side before it becomes a disaster shot. But ideally, we just want to get it relatively close to the sweet spot, at least in the functional zone. And sweet spots are bigger these days, but we still have to hit it. I find that actually an issue. Sorry, you going to say?
No, carry on.
I was going to say that the forgiveness of modern day clubs is actually it's quite a big issue for amateurs, because you can get away with so much these days that, I've had people hitting on the silver or the shiny side of the toe, the shiny part of the toe. So it's not even on the club face. And yet the ball's still flying off and it's only losing maybe 20% distance. And then that quickly can become a toe shank, or even the reverse side of the club. So whereas with old clubs, if you were hitting on the shiny part of the toe, you'd feel it straight away and you'd go, oh God, something has to change. It can quickly go from okay to disaster with modern day clubs, whereas the old clubs, they give you a little bit more feedback in terms of feel. And
I imagine you're just correcting the swing path if you're hitting it more on the toe or the heel to sort of optimize it out.
Not so much the swing path itself. That can relate, but you can have any swing path and still heel and toe the ball. And again, that's one of those lower correlation things for me when I'm teaching. So I had a guy the other day who was swinging out to in by 5 degrees. And yes, we could look at that and say, well, we want to change that in the future. But I know there are tour pros also swinging out to in by 5 degrees. And he was shanking every shot. And I said, well, what are you working on? He said, well, I'm working on my swing path. I said, well, let's work on face strike directly instead. And so by the end of the lesson, or in fact, just a couple of swings later, he didn't shank a single one, yet he still had the same swing path. And so he's going off happy because he's like, well, I'm not shanking it anymore. That's amazing. And so, yeah, when we're working on face strike, we're actually just working on how the club is delivered in 3D space, whether it's delivered closer to your feet or farther away from your feet. And that's a different thing to swing path. Swing path is more the direction the club is moving through impact. As I said, they can relate. You can change swing path and achieve a change in strike, but in my coaching, at least, it's a lower percentage change.
Okay, so one of the last questions. In the last 5 years, what new belief or behavior or habit has most improved your life?
Belief-wise, I suppose I'm constantly asking myself questions, and one of the questions that I asked more recently in the last 5 years is, what would retirement look like to me? So what am I going to do? So I'm working hard. When I was writing the book, I was working 40 hours a week coaching, and then I was going home and doing 40 hours a week of blogging, video creation, things like that. So I'm like, what am I doing all this work for? And so I tried to think of what's the ultimate goal here. And deep down, my ultimate goal was, well, I want to retire because I want to have more free time to do the things I love. So I started thinking, well, what do I love? What would I do if I was retired? And I thought, well, actually, I would just write about golf. And I would play a little bit more golf. And I would do lots more content creation for golf. Because I love the idea. I love coming up with new ideas, new philosophies and instruction, and then sharing that. So from that, I basically designed my life to be like retirement. So I skipped all the hard work and went straight to retirement, in other words. So now my life is I teach golf, and I create content, and I share that content, and I do things like podcasts, which I love. I really enjoy doing this stuff. I could talk to you for days about this stuff. So I think if I was to share one thing with people, is to ask yourself, what is your ultimate goal, or what would your life look like in retirement? And then try, if you can, to add more of those elements in your existing life.
That's a great answer. Well, perhaps we could explore that a little bit further. And so what does a morning sort of routine look like? What's the first thing you do when you wake up?
At this moment, get up, have a cup of coffee, check some emails, check some stats. Then I have a goal setting sheet. It takes me about 10 minutes to do. I've got a yearly goal sheet, a weekly goal sheet, and then a daily goal sheet. Usually I just check the weekly to see what I have that week, to see whether it's online swing lessons or anything like that. Then I would go through my day and I've got it in hour slots. So 9 till 10 do this, 10 till 11 do this. And I just kind of just place things randomly in there. And I know that's a bit obsessive compulsive for most people, but I love doing that. And if I don't do that, I waste a lot of time. Whereas when I do that stuff, I'm incredibly productive. So
those could be to say
write a blog. Yeah, I'll put, so after this, my thing is to write a blog. Yeah, so I'll spend the next 2 hours writing the article that I'm going to have for this week.
And then sort of you come into sort of lunch, and what do you do for say lunch this afternoon?
I don't. We chatted a little about this earlier. I don't eat breakfast, and I don't actually eat lunch. My first meal of my day is at 6 or 7 o'clock at evening, which I know is not most people couldn't do it, but I've practiced intermittent fasting for about 8-10 years now, so I'm quite comfortable doing that. But then I actually go to the gym fasted, and go for an hour, and then I will have a massive meal after that.
And what would your meal sort of be?
Yeah, usually I'll fill up on veggies and some lean meats. I'm not averse to red meat, but some lean meats, and then I'll have a few snacks throughout the evening, then, just as I feel hungry or not. I'm very aware of things like calories and all this stuff, so I'm the type of person, as you can tell, who's constantly monitoring myself for fun. I literally find it fun. If I'm left in a room on my own, I'm probably counting something like what the stock market did today, or thinking about how many calories I ate or something like that. My brain works very, very much in numbers and goal setting and things like that.
Interesting. So it's only one meal a day, and then you would and it was a 16-hour fast?
Probably longer than that. I mean, yeah, my eating window is maybe 4 hours, so it's about 20-hour fast. I'm not one of these intermittent fasters who is really strict with that. I used to be, but now it's more, if we go out somewhere with my wife and we want breakfast, I'll have breakfast. It's not the end of the world. I'm not that strict about it, but it just happens to be that I like doing a 20-hour fast because I prefer the feeling of being full from one massive meal.
Interesting. Very cool. Well, that does sound very fascinating, but we'll jump straight into your personal challenge, which I know something which you deeply believe in, or something which you do daily or weekly, may even be intermittent fasting, but which you could recommend to listeners, so feel free to fire away.
Oh yeah, I wouldn't recommend the intermittent fasting to people. It can be a very tough thing to do. But no, the daily goal, I like goal setting. I think people should partake in that to some extent. It could be a small thing. It could be more obsessive compulsive like I do. But I think that, analyzing successful people, it seems like it's something they all do. Now, whether doing it makes you successful is another thing, but I certainly think it makes you more productive. But at the same time, it is something I enjoy doing. So if you hate goal setting, it might not be for you. But like I said, I just every day I spend 10 minutes analyzing what are the goals for the year I want to achieve. I don't look at those too often. But definitely, what are the goals for the week that I want to achieve? And then what are the things in one day that I can do? Maybe one thing a day that you can do to help you get on track. And all that is based around, like I said, what do I want my retired life to look like? So, yeah, it's all kind of leading to something or has led to something. And I think that has helped me a lot. Example of it is, a weekly goal for me when I was writing the book was to write a chapter. So what were the daily goals? Well, from 5 a.m. until 8 a.m. before work, I would just write. And in 2 months I had a book. So it's something as simple as that, as writing down that goal, that helped me achieve that ultimate goal.
That's a great example. Thank you very much for sharing with us.
No problem.
Thank you very much for your time here today. Where can people find more about you? Do you have a website, Twitter, Instagram, and perhaps your book?
Yeah, I've got all the usual social media channels. So it's adamyoung.golf on Instagram. It's at adamyounggolf on Twitter. And just go to www.adamyounggolf.com, and I've got free ebooks on there, free video series. I write a blog every week. So yeah.
Amazing.
Check me out there.
I will include it all at the bottom of the show notes. And once again, thank you very much. This was great.
No problem. Fun doing.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Adam.
Cheers. Thanks.
Bye-bye.